I don't think we realised when we were starting that it was kind of, that we were being hyped, you know what I mean? I think when you start out, you take what you're given. We'd spent so much time being kind of completely ignored that, you take any praise that you can get. I think it was only years later that I kind of looked at other bands and kind of looked at what we got and realised how annoying it had probably been for anyone who didn't like us. No, but you know that thing, it's kind of like, yeah, if you're a Suede fan, great, they're on the cover of everything. But there is that kind of thing, you just suddenly thought, God, if that was a band that I already didn't like much, by the end of it I'd hated them.
Well, that's exactly it. I think it did us a lot, it did us some favours, but inevitably it was, I think it kind of, we've had to live with the legacy of that ever since in a funny sort of way.
Yeah, it's good.
Like kind of overexposure, and people just sort of like, they just, if I'd have been kind of a music buyer at that point and seen this band all over newspapers all the time, I would have been very, very suspicious of them.
And I think when we started, especially once we got out of London, there was incredible suspicion. The first kind of gigs we did out of London were in Scotland, and it took a while to kind of win places like Scotland over, because they were sick of being told by kind of 12 people in London, these are your new gods, and it took kind of like years of touring before people realised, they're actually quite good as well, The Britpop thing, it's impossible, isn't it? Because it's, no band thinks they're part of a genre, I don't think. No band worth their salt. I think when we started, we were deliberately singing about our lives and real lives, and so it sounded British, you know what I mean? Because that's where we're from, and we I hadn't been anywhere when the band started.
No, the first time I ever went abroad was the second time I went abroad was actually with the band.
Yeah, I'd been to Spain, and that was it. So we sounded British, and I think we kind of referenced a lot of British bands and artists that we liked, which was not common at the time. But I really would hate to feel responsible for the kind of giant pudding that is Britpop.
Yeah, I mean, like any kind of like movement, it sort of starts off with kind of good intentions, I think, and inevitably becomes a cartoon. Look at all these things like punk and whatever, all these other things, these kind of youth movements, music movements, they kind of start off kind of quite interesting. And then you just get other bands that just sort of see an opportunity to kind of like, hang on to the coattails of it, and it becomes devalued.
Well, it becomes a formula, doesn't it? The minute it becomes a formula, the minute you can go, right, this, for a Britpop band, you need, Union Jack underpants and a cheeky grin, and you go a long way.
It was sort of an attempt to talk about our lives in quite an honest way, and to talk about issues that weren't being talked about in music at the time, to talk about sexuality and talk about kind of isolation and poverty and all these things that kind of like weren't being talked about. In the early 90s, you had lots of bands, like the shoegaze and stuff, that weren't in any way confrontational and weren't in any way kind of realistic. It was very sort of like idealistic, 60s inspired cliches that bands were singing about. The songs weren't about anything, they were just sort of like, singing Rhyming Sky with High and things like that. And we wanted to do something very different, and that was what kind of became the Suede blueprint sort of thing. And it was, I'm proud that it was such a strong idea that it kind of like transformed into something bigger than us in a way. But I'm not proud of kind of what the movement became, really.
The thing that really frustrates and frustrated me about it was that other countries kind of got the band straight away. In fact, there was a lot less suspicion, I think, by people who actually heard the music before they'd read 400 articles about us, got it straight away. And, we were off to Scandinavia and the rest of Europe and Asia really early, and it's where we sold most records and we had the most fans, we were always, right from the start, a very international band, and to be kind of tarred by this kind of little Englander thing is pretty horrible.
Yeah, Dogman Style was definitely a sort of step away from Britpop, because by that time I think we'd sort of seen the Britpop thing happening, and in a typical Swedish way, we didn't really want to have anything to do with this sort of kind of child that we brought into the world. So yeah, Dogman Style was everything the Britpop wasn't really, or wasn't everything the Britpop was, whichever way you want to look at it. It's a kind of album about kind of alienation, really. The tradition of rock albums down the years have been about alienation. It was nothing new as a concept, but it was we did it in our own Suede way. And what lasting effect did it have? Well, it's kind of like it was a very difficult album to make, kind of emotionally, especially for me and Bernard, and we were kind of drifting apart. And the lasting legacy of that is that Bernard left the band, and that's it was a very sad thing. But these things happen, and I've been we've been over this so many times that you can't really rewrite history. I do regret that he left the band, but he left the band, and that's just the fact of the matter. I think Coming Up worked because it was just such a good pop album. It's just full of pop hooks. Obviously, if you look at it in a kind of like marketing sense, it's sort of the Britpop thing was happening internationally at that point, and Suede was synonymous with that, whether we liked it or not, and that obviously helped. But I think it was just a really good record. It was just a really unpretentious, sort of very palatable record with lots of really good songs in it. I think some of the songs on that are amongst the best we've ever written. Things like Saturday Night, and even the darker stuff like She and stuff. They're all really good pop songs.
I mean, the making of the record always kind of informs how it sounds, and I think the thing is, it was actually fun to make, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's one of those things that it wasn't a kind of, it wasn't this kind of tortured gothic process of kind of like people, coming in via different doors and not talking and stuff. It was kind of like, it was like being 18 again, when you start a band and everyone just playing together. And I just think more than anything, it's got a bit of joy to it.
Yeah, you can really feel the joy in the record, can't you?
And it's the hardest thing, I think, to get on a record. Or perhaps for Suede it is, kind of like, but you know what I mean? It's kind of like sadness and depression. It's kind of like, that's pretty easy to do.
Default setting.
You know what I mean? It's here at a piano and that stuff comes tumbling out.
But joy is hard.
Yeah.
The up songs are the hardest to write.
Yeah, they really are. And I think you can just feel it in that record. It just has a bit of, spark in its heart.
I think it's just, it's nice. Richard joined and Neil joined, and the whole kind of like tone of the band changed. After Bernard left. There was a lot of tension. Towards the end when Bernard was there, and he'd admitted just as much as we would. And after he left, the whole kind of like the sort of like the mood of the band really changed, and that's very much reflected in that record. So yeah, I'm kind of really proud of that one actually. It's a good record. Well, it's more kind of the last album, A New Morning, really, that kind of, people sort of think that because it sold badly we split up, and it wasn't really that way round. It was kind of more the fact that it sold badly because we weren't really that engaged with what we were doing anymore. And that is, obviously there's no point in being in a band unless you're absolutely 110% engaged with it.
I think we kind of set us, we'd always said that kind of being in a band and it's kind of a privilege, and that you shouldn't release something unless it's extraordinary, and you shouldn't do shows unless they're going to be passionate and they're going to, move people. And we kind of made a record that went against everything we'd ever said. It's a very competent, pleasant record, but it's none of those things that make Suede. And I think there was just at the end of it was just a case of right, we've lost our way, and I don't want to foist any more of this on the public just because it's what we've always done. You know what I mean? I think we just all didn't really know how to make a Suede record at the time.
I think previous to that, you know, we released Head Music, which is kind of, I don't see that as part of the decline of the band. And I know it's not a fan's favourite at all, because of the nature that it is sort of reinventing the kind of sound of the band somewhat. But I think there's lots of that record is great. You know, I think even sort of stuff like She's in Fashion, which is very, very unSuede, it sort of manages to sort of, it's a really well constructed, simple pop song, and for me things like that really work on it. And that's what the intention of that record, to make a much less sort of complex, make music chordally much less complex. And things like, you know, Can't Get Enough, those songs really work. Obviously there's stuff on that record that shouldn't have made it onto the album, but I thought that was a really, kind of an interesting record, Head Music. I mean, it's kind of slightly murky times because, you know, there was lots of illness and drugs going on at the time, and because of that we weren't as focused as we should have been, but kind of musically there's I think some interesting stuff on it.
After we split up, we all went to our respective coffins and closed the door over and just waited for 7 years for Suede to become fashionable again. No,
And they didn't become fashionable.
So we're still there. No, I mean, some people did some musical things, some people did some unmusical things.
Some people didn't do anything.
Some people didn't do anything at all. You know, little things around the house. You know, that was about it. I mean, you did loads of things. You did hundreds of records, didn't you?
I made more. I made as many records post-Suede than I did actually in the band. So I made five albums. So there you go. I made an album with The Tears with Bernard in 2005, just after the band finished, and I made 4 solo albums. Richard
formed a band and released a record. Neil grew a kind of selection of facial hair and played with virtually everybody.
He was in that band, Cafe Penguin.
He was in the Penguin Cafe Orchestra, but he kind of like session played for loads and loads of people.
Yeah, he did lots of touring and session playing and some sort of film work and stuff, didn't he?
Simon moved to Bangkok, and I don't know, I think just got stoned all day, didn't he?
Well, he was in the band.
He was in
Futon and Goo.
He was in these amazing bands in Bangkok that are kind of made up of kind of celebrities. It's really strange. You go and see them, and there was kind of like the equivalent of kind of, you know, a woman from EastEnders, and kind of like a newspaper editor, and all these kind of things. It's really strange. It's like if there was a band here that was made up of kind of Simon, Kathy from EastEnders, Andrew Neil from the Sunday Times, and a couple of musos. You know what I mean? They're great. You should check them out.
I'd like to see that.
It was very strange, and yeah, he did that, and I did some writing and stuff. You know, little things.
The Royal Albert Hall show. We just. They just called us up, the Teenage Cancer people, and said, "Do you want to do a show as Suede?" And for some reason, it just seemed like the right time to do it. And I called everyone up about it, and you know, otherwise I wouldn't have bothered if I wasn't excited about it. I called everyone up about it, and everyone was really excited. And I think everyone sort of felt like me that it kind of might be time to do something. We hadn't played together for 7 years, and everyone thought that it might be time to do something. I think Richard was the only one that had real reservations about it, because Richard's relationship with the band is much more complex, I think, than the rest of us. You know, having the history, having kind of been brought in to replace Bernard and blah blah blah. So Richard took the most convincing, really. Not convincing, that's the wrong word, because that sounds like I was kind of twisting his arm. I kind of didn't want to do it if he didn't want to do it, really. But we talked about it a lot, and
he kind of wanted to know it was going to be done right.
Yeah.
I think there was that whole thing that if it had been, do you want to do a gig at the Brixton Academy for £20,000 or whatever, I think we all would have said no. It just, because you have no idea how it's going to go, and we really didn't, you know, literally, it's kind